right? So I had two back-to-back presentations, which is why I was taking a lot of coffee and working out this morning. So I'll move on to my next one, and which is digital public infrastructure practical approach for Africa. Some of the opportunities that I see working in a complex but very promising environment. Thabo Mbeki, the former president of South Africa, gave a speech once where he said that I am an African and Africa is my business, right? So I will echo Thabo Mbeki by saying I'm an African and Africa is my business. Does anyone know where that photo is taken? And please don't put it on Google Lens. Johannesburg, yeah, Prof. Joburg, yeah. It's actually slightly simulated image of Nairobi's new expressway. You've used it, right? You used it a little while ago, right? Yeah. So by simulated, I played around with it. We have a brand new expressway that runs from Jomo Kenyatta International Airport into the city and into Westlands. That essentially moves you on a journey that used to take 2 to 3 hours in heavy traffic and converts that into 15 minutes. So that's our physical infrastructure, not digital public infrastructure. Before I get in to my presentation on DPI, practical approach for the continent, I want to give some facts, some very recent facts on what's happening across the continent. So by 2050, it's estimated that there will be at least 9.5 billion people on Earth. Did you know that 1 out of 4 of these people will be African? So 25% of the 9.5 billion. This gets even wilder because by 2100, 40% of the world's population will be African. Right? Thank you, and I did not pay the gentleman to clap. So, yeah, but I'm just stating facts, yeah, because I mean we're here talking about facts. So what's causing this huge growth in population over the next 25 to 75 years? Two things: high fertility rates are still happening across the continent, right? We have a brother that we don't like speaking about too often. He's the richest man in the world, and he talks about the risk of population decline in countries. He writes a lot about, right, population decline in Europe, in Asia. He's from Pretoria, but he's a far removed brother. Yeah. I'm not naming names because I can see the camera is on. Yeah. So high fertility rate and, interestingly, improved mortality rates. Right? So people are living longer. But for those two things to happen, you've got to have growing economies, access to food, access to health, clean water. So there has to be some level of prosperity for high fertility rates and improved mortality rates to 40% of the world's population will be African by 2100. Maybe we can start colonizing, I don't know. In 1950, Africa constituted less than 10% of the world's population, and most African countries were colonies anyway, right? either British, French, Belgian, or Portuguese. This current century, Japan started the century with 128 million people, and by 2050, we'll have 106 million people. So they've hit reverse gear. And on average, the median age in African countries is, want to take a guess? 27, 28. Median age in African countries is 18. It's very young, the world's youngest population. Currently, 40% of all Africans are children under the age of 14 years. I'm considered old. Yeah. My kids tell me, Facebook is for old people. You stay there. Yeah, has anyone heard of Pat? You have teenagers. I have two teenagers, and they are functioning on this chat. WhatsApp is even considered old, called Discord. Yeah. And somehow I don't have access to their Discord phones, but they have the most amazing conversations on Discord. I don't even know what Discord looks like. Right? So I think they consider me a force. And the current population as at December 2024, roughly, give or take, on the continent is 1.5 billion people. Huge. Equivalent almost to India. So if by 2100, 40% of the world's population will be African, what does this mean for us now and in the near term? And it's quite straightforward. There's going to be an ever increasing need for practical use cases, which I believe can mostly be driven by digital public infrastructure to manage growth in these countries. And I referred to some of them earlier. Use cases ranging from digital ID, digitized civil registration, urban and city management, digitized permits and licensing, digitized health records, digital payments, instant payments. Education will have to be conducted differently, right? These traditional bricks and mortar classes are probably going to change. Even universities will change in terms of how people are getting trained. So a whole range of things is going to happen as this population continues to increase. But then again, let's ask, what does Africa want? Africa wants to learn, and many African countries are learning from peers. They've learned from India, they've learned from Estonia. We want to learn from the Caribbean and other places, LATAM. Africans also want to build relevant digital public infrastructure. And most importantly, whenever I'm speaking to state actors, they will tell me that Africa wants to own its digital future, right? And this is extremely important to understand. Not just a plug and play model, but they want to own their digital future. So the brother who I spoke about earlier often speaks about population implosion, not explosion, implosion, so it's going backwards. In Europe, parts of Asia, and North America. Interestingly, in any of the analysis that he provides, I'm so happy that he forgot he comes from Pretoria and he's not focused on Africa. So we'll grow and he's not watching, right? Because he talks about all these other places, but there's growth happening in these other places. Doesn't that mean anything? So who are going to be the next consumers in the next 25, 30, 40, 50 years? It's where there's growth. So with that said, as far as DPI in Africa is concerned, do we have a common understanding? And I think we do. DPI is an overarching concept on the continent. And most people identify with the fact that there are three core functions or three core areas of digital public infrastructure, including ID, payments, and a data exchange layer that show the fundamental needs that DPI addresses. Importantly, there's also interoperability and modularity, which highlights how these three functions work together. Open standards is important. And then a techno-legal governance framework is also important that ensures that systems are built on secure and adaptable framework for adoption, whether at a country level or the regional level. And then participation from both public and private sector will emphasize a collaboration in developing and implementing DPI systems. So that's the common understanding that we currently have of digital public infrastructure on the continent. Sorry, that's not very clear, but I'll try and talk through it. There are several initiatives that are going on vibrantly across each of the three DPI pillars on the continent. The fact is that very many African countries have existing digital infrastructure. It's not a new concept. Right? We've been doing this for a long time. You know, I'd put up a slide of my colleague Matthew, and he spoke about his M-Pesa DPI. Then I removed it because I had dinner with him yesterday, and I said, no, let me not put him up. But his M-Pesa DPI, it's a question. And I'll be the one openly saying it's not, because it's not currently interoperable, right? But it is so important in our ecosystem that you cannot build any digital public infrastructure without framing it around a product such as M-Pesa. It is everywhere. Even as I was seated here, I'm sending and receiving M-Pesa payments as long as I have Wi-Fi, right? It is that important to our ecosystem. Matthew talked about 50, I think it was 2023, 59%. That number has gone up. It's probably 70, 80%. I used to work at Safaricom, so I used to look at those dashboards very closely. So in 2023, 59% of Kenya's GDP was channeled through M-Pesa. Both an opportunity and a risk, right? What he didn't give was that figure in dollars, so I'll share the figure. 60% of Kenya's GDP in 2023 is, give or take, $72 billion. Not small change. When M-Pesa goes down on a Friday night, do you know what happens in Kenya? The bars close because people are not paying for their drink and their food, right? The fuel stations will not accept for you to come and fill your tank because you'll say M-Pesa is down, I'll come tomorrow. They'll never see you again, right? The economy stops, and that's a risk. So dependency on just that one product is a huge risk. And the fact that it's, well, privately owned, but the government of Kenya does have significant shareholding in the product, right? But the interoperability part is the one that we need to address to truly move it to the next. So any approach of DPI on the continent cannot disregard these systems, but instead should look at aiming to integrate and also enhance successful existing systems that align with DPI principles. Could be mobile money, payment platforms, and these could be enhanced rather than being replaced. We know that approximately 85% of African countries have national ID systems or foundational ID systems. 70% of these national ID systems collect biometric data. Kenya has struggled. I wish Naga was here to talk about how Kenya has struggled with a transition from foundational ID to digital ID. And for some of the reasons that Matthew refers to in terms of has it been safe and inclusive? No. Has there been public participation? No. So if you're a Kenyan like me, and I wore it today, this is what we consider our digital ID. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this. If you ever want to identify a Kenyan from a mile away, just look for the armband. So this is what we call our digital ID. They wear it everywhere. President Uhuru Kenyatta made it very popular when he came to the Caribbean. He had it all the time. And so we consider this our digital ID because we cannot sort out our basic digital ID. And I think until we can address the issues around safety and inclusion, public participation, we should not even go down that road. We need to have a proper framework, right? Because the concern was that if Kenya rolls out its digital ID in the absence of a safety and inclusion framework, that ID could be used for surveillance and all sorts of other issues and challenges around it. So for now, I'll stick to this, yeah, as my ID. I spoke about how countries already do have existing digital initiatives. We probably did not call it digital public infrastructure. I think previously they may have been referring to digital transformation, right? But there was things happening around what could potentially be digital public infrastructure, but we referred to it as digital transformation. African Union has made tremendous strides on digital ID interoperability, and the project that co-develop is working alongside the Africa Free Trade Continental Area, which falls under the AU, is to initiate a DigiPass. And the DigiPass is not ID, but is verifiable credentials layered on existing national ID. It could be a driver's license. It could be a basic national ID without biometric. It could be a passport, and will essentially facilitate the movement of people and goods across the continent. In mid-Feb 2025, at the Heads of State gathering in Addis Ababa, the Heads of State approved the Continental Digital ID framework. And so the DigiPass was given a go. And MOSIP has been a godsend for many, many countries on the continent. Ethiopia is rolling out its digital ID on MOSIP. Uganda is rolling out its digital ID. And Uganda is brownfield, not greenfield. So they're transitioning from about 27 million existing IDs into MOSIP as digital ID. In other countries, Benin, Burkina Faso, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the president of Burkina Faso. Yeah, he does his own thing and we love him. Yeah. Morocco was the first country on the continent to roll out MOSIP as its digital ID. So MOSIP is doing a lot of work in terms of providing countries with options on an open source ID platform where countries have control and sovereignty is taken care of. And then digital payments. I spoke about M-Pesa. The Tanzanians have set up Jamii Wallet. There's lots of open G2P programs that are happening across the continent. Mobile money, and they're not dead. They're not in the minefield. They're not in the graveyard. They're active and they're transacting. I think M-Pesa has currently 38 million active within 30 days, active customers, 38 million. And when we look at revenue in a telco like Safaricom, voice brings nothing, data brings nothing. M-Pesa used to pay my dividend, right? That's how big it is, and that's how important it is. There's a push because of dominance and the risk that I referred to earlier, to then separate the telco from the mobile money company, right? And so M-Pesa is now registered as M-Pesa Africa Holdings and is considered a subsidiary of Safaricom PLC. And so M-Pesa Africa Holdings runs the M-Pesa business in Kenya and runs M-Pesa business in some of the neighboring countries. So they're in Ethiopia, for example, and other countries where they're expanding to. And so as to avoid one Chinese wall right, between the companies, and also avoid risk, and have M-Pesa Africa as a standalone company that exclusively runs the mobile money business. And that strategy seems to be working for Safari. From a regulatory perspective, I think there's a big push for regulators, whether it's at the central bank or the communications authorities, to be proactive and to be open in terms of licensing some of these new services. Instant payment systems. I spoke about interoperability of M-Pesa. So the next conversations that we're having are around setting up a national payment system. It could be, well, my current preference, let me not say mine, our current preference is to have the central bank move into an existing national payment system that's currently 100% owned by the Kenya Bankers Association, right? Take equity in that, so PesaLink, and then PesaLink will then have shareholding of the central bank, who's the regulator, and all the bankers, Kenya Bankers Association, and all the telcos, and then enforce interoperability so that everybody can play in that one space, and the movement of funds between mobile money wallets to bank accounts and vice versa will be seamless. And so that's the direction that I think we should take, and I'm suspecting we're going to move in that direction. In terms of data exchanges, I've talked about a couple of flagship examples. Ghana's instant payment system is running a very vibrant data exchange. Uganda has UG Hub, which is a government service bus that facilitates citizen data exchange. And more recently, the Tanzanians have set up a very vibrant data exchange called the Jamii Exchange. And Jamii in Swahili means family. So they've built what they're calling a Jamii stack. And if anyone is interested in seeing what the Jamii stack looks like, please look for me after and I will share that slide with you. So it's Jamii stack. It has Jamii wallet built into it. It has a Jamii number, a unique ID built into it, and then has Jamii exchange. So those are some of the ongoing initiatives that are happening. So Robert is creating his own tea break. If you came to visit me, this is how we would brew our tea. Kenya grows fantastic coffee. Fantastic. I'm a coffee drinker, but everyone else in my family drinks tea, and we brew it with a lot of milk. Right, Anina? Lots of milk, right? Yeah. So the first process, you've got to boil the water, then boil the milk separately, and then mix the two. And of course, the tea leaves, right, to make a strong cup of tea. So that's why I call this DPI brewed in an African pot, right? What are the preconditions for success? So the tea is brewing, and we'll drink it after I'm done with this presentation. I referred earlier to some of the existing and situating DPI within existing systems, M-Pesa, Irembo, and others. 60% Kenya's GDP, total GDP in 2023 was 120 billion. So $72 billion goes through M-Pesa. And this amounted to 20 billion transactions in 2023. I also did a quick comparison with PayPal to illustrate the extent of M-Pesa's dominance. PayPal's total payment volume in the same year, 2023, was $1.53 trillion. I think PayPal is previously owned by that brother I referred to, right? This guy keeps coming up. Yeah. Yeah. He gives us nightmares. He's smart, but he gives us nightmares. There's no country-specific data available on those PayPal transactions that I referred to. But if we assumed that 80% of those transactions happened in the United States, which I think is a fair assumption, right? Then that would still mean that less than 5% of America's GDP flows through PayPal. That tells you just how dominant a service like M-Pesa is. And we build on successful systems that already exist and that already embody DPI principles, and we can find them, they do exist. And how do we tailor DPI to local political economies? Africa has 54 countries. We speak 3 colonial languages: English, French, Portuguese. And I don't even want to imagine the number of indigenous languages on the continent. I speak 2, and on average, most people will speak 2, over and above either English or French or Portuguese. So the average African speaks 3 languages fluently. Speaks, reads, and writes 3 languages fluently. A lot. I would say it would be thousands of languages. And then localized solutions. The bulk of the people on the continent are 18 to 20 years of age. We need to harness that talent. Because if it's not harnessed, we've had problems in the past where, because of the lack of opportunity, the lack of access to earning incomes, many young people have been drawn into movements such as Al-Shabaab. Is anyone familiar with Al-Shabaab? Right? Al-Qaeda linked organizations, because of the lack of opportunity. So we need to harness that talent. And messaging that I get all the time when working with state actors is, can we push for the case for an Africa stack like Tanzania is doing and many other countries? And again, when talking about digital public infrastructure, we do need to speak about some of the physical infrastructure, or the infrastructure imperative, which may include connectivity, access to reliable internet connectivity, and reliable energy are non-negotiable foundations for digital public infrastructure. We know that in Africa, less than 40% of the population is online, and almost half lack access to reliable electricity. So these challenges can create significant hurdles to digital transformation, and we need to address the connectivity and energy gap. And then again, as the demand for digital solutions grows, with the rise of AI-driven technologies, energy demands will increase. So we need sustainable energy solutions. In Kenya, we've been very fortunate that we are very close to shutting down all our hydro plants, hydro electric plants. We no longer will rely on dams or water levels, as we're transitioning all our energy needs to geothermal. But again, natural, it's in the ground, right? It doesn't occur everywhere. But clean energy, green energy, and whether there's drought or there's excess rain, we're not going to depend on those dams. And even when the dams have water, 70% of the water level that you're seeing is silt, which means they cannot actively produce or generate hydro. It's expensive. So climate-friendly energy sources such as renewable energy, geothermal, are being prioritized. Some of you may have read that Microsoft recently signed an agreement to set up data centers in the Rift Valley, Kenya's Rift Valley, that will be powered by geothermal and solar. And that's a massive investment because it will be a completely green data center. Building local capacity is important. So we're not going to get into vendor lock-in contract. This has been a challenge for many low and middle-income countries on the continent. But we do want local technical capacity, such as the center that Rwanda is talking about, building skills, maintain and manage systems, map the current technical skills and policy capacities of each country to identify gaps and areas for targeted capacity building so that we're not 100% dependent on external expertise, but we'll have a transition of skills and knowledge over time so that we can make our DPI system sustainable. Sometimes people have argued that the public sector in African countries may lack capacity in digital technology, but I don't think this is entirely true. Each country's situation is different, and we do need nuanced approaches to capacity building to ensure DPI systems are sustainable and effective. So I provided a summary, and I see the MC walking closer to me, so she may shut off my mic anytime. 7 policy recommendations. Feel free to take up them. These are things that I've referred to earlier in my slide. So tailoring DPI governance to local needs, reflect the distinct political and economic context of African countries. Establish local government structures that incorporate key domestic players, government, private sector, and civil society. Political buy-in is critical. You've seen how Rwanda has progressed because of political buy-in, what we call skin in the game. And then multi-stakeholder engagement. Can we involve technologists, civil society, and academia, who should be an integral part of DPI planning and deployment in Africa, foster widespread support and minimize implementation challenges. So the tea is now ready. I've put it into the flask. I'm serving it with mandazi. I think you probably have a name for that in like a fried dough. Yeah. Ready? Yeah. And I think in South Africa they call it fat cake. It makes you fat. Yeah. So thank you very much. Can I go first? If there are any questions, and I can see several, please feel free to pass the mic. There is one in the front, one in the back. Okay. So the MC asks if you could please stand and perhaps introduce yourself when you're asking your question. Thank you.
I'm Richard Aiken. I'm a surgeon. Brilliant presentation. Enjoyed it immensely. Obviously, the term leapfrogging comes to mind when I listen to your presentation. And indeed, obviously, Rwanda is in the process of leaping. On a larger scale, civilizations seem to have leapfrogged along the way. Each time, usually, each leap is made by a different geographic area. The United Kingdom leapfrogged to become the dominant empire of the world. Then the United States made a leap. And now we see Africa, China, India making leaps. Do you see a time when the leap of that frog is going to be universal, where the entire humanity leaps rather than leaping in geographical areas?
I think I'll take one more and then try and respond to that. But you may have better answers from the frontier, but I'll try and respond to that. Yeah, one more question. Please, frontier.
Robert, again, both the presentations were fabulous. I was in Kenya last month, and I heard from people who lived in Nairobi 20 years ago about crime situation in Kenya, 15, 20 years ago. You also mentioned some terrorist things that you had there. But Nairobi just now was, in my mind, fabulous. I didn't see any crime, nothing being reported in the papers. I couldn't help wondering if there was a relationship with M-Pesa and, how that has become ingrained in society, inclusion of everyone, and, how the country has grown. I tried to look for numbers, but whatever I was getting online was not correlating. So, do you have something to say on that? And I have another question. You spoke about the identities, the African countries coming together and trying to find their, interoperability between their digital identities. And Africa has probably the largest number of countries, right? 54. So when you're talking of 84%, that's large number of countries coming together. What are the issues and challenges that have been faced there? Because are some identities proprietary systems, or they're all based on some open source? Just some insight into that.
Do you mind if I start with Prof's question and then I'll come to yours? Yeah. So, I mean, I think when it comes to ID, there are various issues. And first of all, remember I referred to the English, the French, and the Portuguese. For many countries, legal systems are based on the colonial legacy. And the French legal system vis-a-vis the English legal system or common law are two very different things. So one, most of the ID systems are foundational, so they're not collecting biometrics just yet, right? But for those who've decided to transition to digital ID, they're then moving into the stages of collecting biometrics. There's a challenge, and I think I did want to, just for you to confirm this, but most of the top vendor ID companies are French, correct? Yes. So they've built a lot of capacity and competence around that. So they see most of them, they're not happy, right? Because that's their bread and butter, right? So they've put, and you'll find vendor-locked ID systems that these countries have had for years, probably post-colonial or pre-colonial. And 50 years later, we're still stuck in the same rut, right? So I think breaking those legacy systems to then say, can we transition to open source systems that give power back to the countries and enable the countries to then, one, have access to the source code. They can customize it as they see fit, right? And they're not dependent on the vendor for like the change request that I spoke to earlier. It costs a lot of money and time. It does. But it's a very successful business model for the French companies and has been for years. It has been for years, right? But the fact that the African Union can actually agree on Continental digital ID framework is a huge win, because the DigiPass layered on existing foundational ID, digital or not, will mean that we'll be able to identify anyone who has a DigiPass, regardless of which country they come from and which system that ID has been issued. Right? It's not replacing; it's a layer of verifiable credentials. Right? It's not touching the sovereignty part of the country, which is the issuance of identity. No, but it's layered credentials on existing foundational ID. Yeah, I think coming to a country and saying that will change your entire ID system, some people will go to war. Yeah, yeah. So the philosophical question on leapfrogging or the frog leaping, and will humanity? I need to ask ChatGPT. I should ask ChatGPT, right? Let me check. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a philosophical question. One, maybe I could give a small, nuanced answer to that. And I'm not sure. I'm not very familiar, but I'm not sure whether Jamaica still uses landlines. You still do? My children don't even know what a landline looks like. That is leapfrogging, right? They know mobile phone, they know dual SIM, triple SIM, you name it. They have no idea. I once showed them a red call box, and they were taking photos to put on their social media, because this was like history. And I mean, if you walk around the UK, of London, they have call boxes that work. My brother and I were bad kids, and what we used to do, my dad used to try and manage the phone bill. It was the rotary one, right? So my dad used to lock it, yes. But we all learnt about Morse code. And so that's how we used to make calls. And at the end of the month, my dad would see this huge bill. But we were ahead of our time. Yeah. We were ahead of our time. And some of us had even made international calls through tapping, right? 578109 12345, pause. 1234567, pause. And we were ahead of our time. But I think that's a classic example of leapfrogging, right? Mobile money would be an application of leapfrogging. You go to the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, Finland, they use Swish, right, as a product, but it's bank to bank, instant payments. So when you tell them you have a phone, it's sitting in my bag there, and I can do a P2P payment instantly, then they ask you, where's the bank in the middle? I said, which bank? It's my wallet to another wallet, right? At this point, the bank is irrelevant. Right? And so that also baffles some of those countries. So, but I'll ask ChatGPT and then I'll get back to you. Yeah. We have one more question. I can't.
Robert.
Sorry?
Oh. Should I go ahead? Okay. Hi, Robert.
Hi.
I am Kenyan without the thing. I'm
Yes,
going to get one. The first thing
please.
when
Have,
I land.
I have an extra one.
Please, thank
Please,
you.
so it's here.
I can't
Yeah.
be walking around without the ID.
It's a shame.
Anyway, I really appreciate the narrative you've painted around Kenya and the leaps that we are making, including the aspect of the lack of trust of some of the initiatives that are there, including having a digital ID. I think we're facing, thank you to Co-Develop. I'm from OpenFN. My name is Roina. And Co-Develop is working with us on a national registration initiative in Ghana. And some of those mistrust issues are also popping up in that. My question is, for us in the DPG space, we put a lot of intention with transparency and all the other aspects of DPG that you've mentioned, including trust, inclusivity. Is there an untapped role or an unexplored way that we can contribute to building trust in the DPI space, because it's a core part of what we are as DPGs and being open source also. So is there something on the DPG aspect that we can push in terms of furthering the trust narratives in DPIs?
Yeah. Rihanna, I'll just respond very quickly to that because it was on the top of my mind. DPGs, of course, are doing an amazing job in terms of rolling out products and services and engaging with governments. One of the areas that I'm really passionate about and to build trust is also to build, and I talked about it earlier, is to build and leave very tangible skills and knowledge on the ground for the people who are going to customize those systems. So if you're talking about system integrators, work with local companies. We have many young people who can code and hack into almost any system you want, right? And who are hungry for these opportunities. Bring up those system integrators so that there's local skills and knowledge on the ground, and we're not dependent on DPGs that may not necessarily be resident, but we have local skills and knowledge on the ground. There are some DPGs here that we fund, and we've had conversations on even hiring locally, right? Get local actors to engage with state. Local system integrators build their skills and knowledge. MOSEP has been doing a good job of even taking SIs to India and getting them certified, so that by the time they come back to a Zambia or to a Tanzania, they have the skills and knowledge to be able to customize these solutions and can pretty much troubleshoot almost any problem. That's the only call to action that I would have. And I need to take Prof's question because I'm in his house.
Thank you. My name is David McBean from the School of Business. You spoke about 54 countries, and it struck me when you're talking about M-Pesa. So two things I want to ask you. You're now doing Pesa Link, which is bringing back banks to M-Pesa, however we address it up, right? But M-Pesa was formed because the banks were failing the people. So I was curious to say what now is the solution that Pesa Link would bring to M-Pesa? And are we at risk of trying to develop solutions looking for problems as opposed to having problems and developing solutions? And then my follow-up question on that is, you have 54 countries, different challenges. Is there a risk of trying, when we do this overarching DPI, and I also link it back to the Caribbean, which would be about I don't know, 20 countries, are we at the risk of having a one size fits all, which in the end does not provide the solution to folks? And the last comment is that I was in telecom. M-Pesa was a beacon for all of us. We tried to do it in the Caribbean. It failed. One, because of policy and the regulators. And two, it wasn't perceived as as being necessarily a solution to any particular. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. I'll try and answer your questions quickly. I think on the first one, M-Pesa thrived in a situation where the majority of the population was unbanked. The banks did not want these people in their banking. So at the onset in 2007, and M-Pesa was initially donor funded by DFID, or what was DFID. But at the onset in 2007, I think financial inclusion for those who had access to bank accounts was 26%. Currently, over the last 15 or so years, financial inclusion is closer to 95, if not higher. Right? So these people have all been onboarded. Because a mobile money wallet counts as the same as having a bank account, the same thing. So financial inclusion has gone through the roof. The challenge with M-Pesa is the fact that it's not interoperable. It was a closed loop, right? It has also, rightfully so, been called expensive. I can show you the tariff. It sometimes is considered expensive in terms of even the percentage that's being charged based on the transaction value. So with a national switch, and PesaLink was just an idea. I'm not saying it will go down that route, but if PesaLink does become a national switch, then we solve for the issue of interoperability, right? So you'll get the same banks. The stone that was rejected that became the cornerstone. We'll come back into that situation, right? So the same banks that initially hedged and saw M-Pesa as competition now realize that instead of competing, let's collaborate, make this thing interoperable, and then have the movement of money across the wallet seamless. And they've already agreed to that. M-Pesa has already agreed to that. And with the regulator at play and possibly taking a stake in the switch, then it becomes you either toe the line or you're out. Right? So all the telcos will be in it, all the banks will be in it, and it becomes a fair playing game for everybody. What I'm not sure about is pricing at the moment. I can't see how the pricing conundrum will be sorted out because it's such huge revenue earner for Safaricom. So pricing, I think, will be where the next battle will be fought. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Yeah. There was one other question on we did M-Pesa. We're out of time, right? Yeah, but we can speak on the side, yeah. Before I get kicked out.
Michael McNaughton. So M-Pesa started as a prepaid system. And the regulator at the time, their only concern was that the funds are backed in a bank account. Now M-Pesa is literally bigger than most of the banks. Has there been any changes in the regulation around how M-Pesa operates today, or it's still prepaid?
It's still a pre-funded model and backed by a bank because M-Pesa and Safaricom does not have a single banking license.
Okay, so
yes. So they're still linked to, Rihanna, it's NCBA, right? NCBA, KCB.
Okay, so effectively a banking model is they have deposits and they lend out multiples in said deposit.
Yes.
So the risk to M-Pesa today is that traditional banking model could actually put that M-Pesa ecosystem at risk.
There is a possibility, but I'm sure they have the right agreements in place to make sure that that does not happen. And the amount of money that is being held in trust by the banks on behalf of M-Pesa is in the billions. So it also gives the bank capital to onward lend, right, for other projects.
Which is the risk.
Which is the risk. Thank
Okay,
God I'm not a risk analyst. So
an intense look at the DPI trends in Africa. But now we're going to break for lunch.